Hello, this is Law Express. There are rules of engagement pertaining to everyday relationships, especially in the domestic setting. On where people act in contravention to these rules of engagement, they could get in conflict with the law. Today on Law Express, we discuss domestic violence. I have with me my co-panelists as usual. We'll go for a quick commercial break. When we come back, you get to meet them, and then we get into the conversation for today. This is Law Express.
My mother passed on to me an age-old moisturizing secret handed down from generation to generation. Shea butter has been and still remains the ultimate and trusted natural product for the skin. It is safe for all, including newborns. I use Violon Shea butter products for my hair and skin and for all my children right from birth. Violon Shea butter is an amazing diaper cream. I love my family. That is why I trust only Violon Shea butter products for our skincare needs.
Violon Shea butter. Feed your skin right.
Our guest for today, Iris K. Agri-Orleans. She is a private legal practitioner and she likes reading and sightseeing. Lamteg Apanga is a private legal practitioner. His other interest areas are charity work and traveling. Nuhela Seidu. She is a private legal practitioner and a consistent member of our 3-lawyer panel on the show every week. She plays a dual role as host of the show and likes to play tennis and read.
Domestic violence is violence done to a person in a domestic situation. And so domestic violence cannot be defined without viewing what a domestic situation is. There are several aspects to domestic violence. The most common and what most people know is physical violence, where a partner would abuse another, physically assault another person. But it doesn't end there. There are other forms of domestic violence. One of the forms of domestic violence include sexual abuse even. Okay. The law is very clear. The domestic violence law is very clear on the different aspects of domestic violence. So we have, as I've said earlier, physical violence, there's sexual violence, including even intentionally infecting a person who has actually consented to engage in sexual contact with you of a sexually transmitted disease when that person did not know ahead of time that you were actually infected with that.
I suggest we situate the conversation and take the various instances or types of abuse one after the other.
Yes.
You talked about the physical violence or physical abuse. I think we could expand that more. And then we move on to the sexual abuse.
So with physical abuse, it includes the regular hitting, forcible detention of a person. So if you prevent a person with whom you are in a domestic relationship from leaving the home, that is detention. It's domestic violence, it's physical violence. Depriving a person of food, of water, of shelter, basic needs, all of those things form part of physical violence because you are depriving them of things that they need for their own survival.
To add to that, I think we could talk to the issue of cruelty, inhumane treatment, degrading treatment. Like you put the person's food on the floor and ask him or her to eat like a dog.
Yes, exactly.
That is degrading.
It's degrading.
Yeah.
So any act that is set to humiliate a person make the person feel less than, it also forms part of domestic violence.
Let me just take our viewers one step back. You know, there's an act of parliament, and for the benefit of those who are eager to read further, you could just check it out. It's the Domestic Violence Act 2007, Act 732. So those who would want to read can pick it up and then read and get to know more. Back to it, we have several offenses under the Criminal Offences Act that are generally offenses. However, in order to specifically situate those criminal offenses in a domestic setting, the Domestic Violence Act has said that in addition to the criminal offenses, so it's not as if those offenses have been suspended if we are in a domestic setting. In addition to the criminal offenses, these other abuses or conduct can amount to domestic violence.
Yeah.
One of them we mentioned already is the physical abuse.
Yeah. Further to the issue about criminal offenses,
Yes.
The law specifically indicates what criminal offenses fall within the scope of domestic violence, like you rightly said.
Yes.
So it's usually matters that or offenses that constitute a threat or harm to a person under our criminal law.
Absolutely.
So it's not like everything else,
Yes.
you know, but
No.
just those ones,
Those ones that, yes.
constitute a threat of harm or
harm in itself.
in itself
Yes.
to the person.
Absolutely.
I think we are going to introduce the
Yes,
next.
yes.
Yeah.
So my sister here has spoken about the physical abuse and also mentioned economic abuse or sexual abuse. There's also the aspect of economic abuse or even psychological abuse.
Before we go to that, can't we just stay on the sexual abuse since it's already been introduced?
Absolutely, you can.
Because she made references to intentionally infecting people with STIs.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, maybe we could explore
Yes.
that further.
So sexual abuse is not just physically or violently raping a person. Sexual abuse includes harassment, constantly harassing a person to have some kind of sexual contact with you. That is part of domestic violence. Engagement of a person in a sexual act, knowing full well that you have an STI and you do not reveal that to the person and you have this sexual contact with the person. It is also part of domestic violence. Harassment, as I've explained earlier, and threats. Threats of rape, threats of unwanted sexual contact, unwanted sexual advances. All of those form part of domestic violence, and it is properly captured under the Domestic Violence Act.
Yeah, just to add a bit on the sexual aspect, it's not necessarily touching what we refer in Ghanaian parlance as private part. As far as you feel sexual about the contact, it then can amount to sexual harassment or sexual abuse. And it's not a one-way street where women are always the victim. Men can also be victims of sexual abuse or sexual harassment, particularly when someone touches you in a manner that you do not like, and it's within the domestic setting. It can amount to sexual abuse, whether touching your head, your back, or particular part of your body, because no one has the right to touch you without your consent. And once that touch continues consistently, and it mustn't be more than one or twice, one is enough. Yes. So yes, the law actually says that.
I think that it may be hard probably to prove that if perhaps somebody touches you at the back of your head, it's sexual.
What I can add is this: it's not hard to prove because there would have been incidents that would lead you to ordinarily believe that those touches were sexual in nature. It will not come in a vacuum. It would definitely not come in a vacuum. Yes. So as long as you see that there is a pattern where that person would have made some prior advances, would have said certain things about your physical appearance, would have required you to do certain things, and then the person follows it up with even one touch, then you can actually say that indeed.
I agree with you both, especially because the law clearly states that if perhaps that single act in itself, in isolation, wouldn't have been seen as that.
Yes.
But then you look at it together with all prior
other-
actions
Exactly.
and things that might have happened,
Yes.
then together it forms that. I just needed to poke that place so
Yes,
that we can
we
bring
can-
this
yes.
bit in.
And you know, we may even be looking at it with adults. Children are sometimes the worst victims of sexual
Yeah.
abuse. And abuse are not always the manner where persons even use their fingers. Sometimes they use objects.
Okay.
They use objects to touch children or have contact with them in certain places that they are not supposed to be. And so it matters not, even if you are the parent.
Yeah.
Even if you are the parent or you are a family relation, it doesn't matter that you have that relationship with the person. You do not have the right to touch the child or have sexual contact with the child in that manner.
I think that sexual abuse could also come in the form of any conduct that humiliates, degrades, or affects the sexual integrity of a person.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So if probably you like to have anal sex and the person feels that it's violating his or her sexual integrity,
Yes.
regardless of the fact that the person consented to another form of sex, that still is abuse.
It's still
It is.
abuse.
So tying somebody up,
even using
you know.
refusing to use a condom. A person can consent to sex
With-
provided
yeah.
that you use a condom, and then you refuse to use it, or during
take
the
it
act
off
you take
midway.
it off midway. It is still sexual abuse. So anything that where the consent is not expressed, where the other party does not know the full facts as pertains to your intentions, it is sexual abuse.
Great. I think you can now introduce the economic bit.
Yes. There's also another aspect of domestic violence that perhaps we overlook, which is the issue of economic abuse or economic deprivation, where any act or conduct tends to deprive a person of his economic benefits, or intends either actually deprive the person or intends to deprive the person. So if a person is entitled to a particular benefit or material item, and by your conduct you deprive the person or dispose of that particular item, that conduct amounts to financial or economic abuse.
Deprivation, yeah.
So in situations where a parent dies and then someone goes for letter of administration and decides to sell out properties that's supposed to go to the surviving spouse and children,
Yeah.
or an opinion comes over, takes over the property and asks you to go out, or there's a dissolution of marriage or some misunderstanding in the course
You
of
start
marriage.
hiding
and
property.
Hiding property, or not just hiding property, actually drive the spouse and children out of the house, or even selling spousal property, which brings us to a very important issue. It's been stated and clearly now that all matrimonial properties that are sold without the consent of the other party are actually now void. It's void because you would need the consent of the other party to do so.
Yeah.
And that can go into the setting of economic deprivation or abuse.
So with this economic deprivation, we're looking at the protection mostly of the person's property or right to property.
Absolutely.
So for instance, you are in a home, there's some problem, and the wife who feels like she has a better right to the kitchen chooses to lock up the kitchen every time to deprive the husband from being able to prepare his own meals or being able to take a glass of water. This could fall within the scope. Another thing we see a lot in the movies is where there's a small problem between a couple and one party moves the other person's clothes, throw them out, bends them, goes to smash the windscreen of the car, slash the
Or even
tires,
seize the keys of the
keys
vehicle.
of the
Yes.
vehicle, all of that.
and take them away.
Or where you have a joint account, he blocks you access
Blocks
to
your
the
access
account.
to the account.
Yeah.
All those things amount to economic deprivation.
And apart from that, even restricting your access to your own funds.
Yeah.
So you've worked, your money is in your account, and the person has seized your checkbook, your ATM card. It is economic abuse because the person is seeking to control your access to those funds.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's even worse in situations where spouses work together. And then the man is usually the boss. He runs the business, and the lady is the one who assists him. and
You
at the end
join
of
the
the
salary.
month, at the end of the month, he refuses to pay. And
No, he
says-
adds it to his,
Exactly.
like, I'm the
As
head
though,
of
yes, I'm the
family.
one head of family, or says that, oh, I have used part of salary to take care of this,
Yes.
so be it. No, it is not the way. It's not the right thing to do. The person has a right to what she has earned. Let her decide whether to give it to you or to use it for whatever project you intend to. But
And to add to that, maintenance sums are separate from salary. So if you are working together,
This is what we
you
call the
must-
chop money.
Yes. So your monthly or weekly maintenance sum is different from your salary, because if you were working in another establishment, you would have received your salary, and then you would have also receive your maintenance sum for the running of the home.
You're being too
you-
posh. Let's
money.
call it what it is. Your
chop
chop
money.
money.
Chop money, yeah, your upkeep money.
Your
or
upkeep money.
household expenses.
Therefore, you lumping it together in an attempt that what will happen is all the money that the person would have been entitled to would be used for the running of the home is unacceptable. It is all part of economic abuse.
Some people think that where there's no physical evidence of the abuse, like there's no injury, there's no scar, no broken bones, or physical destruction of a car or some other property, then there's no abuse. I'm saying this to introduce the other aspects, which is the emotional, verbal, and psychological abuse. I think this is the commonest form of abuse almost everywhere, and it's the most frequently used form of violence, but the least talked about.
I think that this law particularly has a very wide scope in
Yes.
sense of its reach.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because with emotional abuse, it extends very wide. Any conduct that seeks to humiliate, make somebody put some fear in the person, destabilize the person, make the person jittery,
Unhappy,
and
miserable.
unhappy or
Oppressed,
miserable. Yes,
depressed.
any conduct. But to a large extent, I sometimes get a bit worried that others could take undue advantage of the scope of the law.
Yeah.
Because the law is so wide in scope.
Merely making an allegation or bringing an allegation against another person doesn't mean automatically you get the outcome you need. Definitely, the matter will be checked out. The people would inquire into that. I don't want to go ahead of the conversation to talk about social inquiry reports and all. But
my only concern about this aspect of the law is that we live in a society where some amount of, if you want to call it margin of error or some oversights should be overlooked.
I
But
get
unless
you,
unless there is consistent attempt at humiliating you or making you miserable or making you unhappy in a manner that you can tell that this is actually aimed at you, then, because imagine that every little thing we are all running to the police and say that I have been sexually also emotionally abused. I've been emotionally abused. I've been emotional.
Of course,
You
after
know
the
that-
fourth time, they
let
would
me
know.
Let me give you a very typical example of what you call in local parlance akutia, or the kind of song where you play
Ekutia.
yes, to humiliate other persons. You understand? You all know that there's some background problem already. Then you get up in the morning and start playing a particular line of songs.
so innuendos.
Innuendos.
But you see, I totally agree with you.
But they may be also be genuine coincidence.
The law is there to err on the side of caution. So yes, we know that there will be people who will try to take advantage of the situation. But the fact is, the law clearly says that where the person conducts him or herself in a way that makes you feel. So it's more about the victim's feelings and the situation that the person's conduct has put you into that becomes the issue at stake.
Largely, I agree that this law perhaps wants to look at other aspects apart from physical abuse.
Yes.
So that where in a domestic setting, you verbally abuse someone by using words that humiliates the person or makes the person miserable or unhappy, but there are no physical contact, okay? Or by conducting yourself in a manner that the person becomes miserably, let's say, unhappy.
Or even afraid,
Jittery, or jittery.
wordless.
Understand? Yes, because you are shouting at home, you are raising your voice, though you are not beating the person. You are using words that are not unprintable words on the person. I think that is what the law largely wants to look at, not the very extreme and loose examples of having regular conversations and people get upset, or where some persons, for some reason, they are broke, so every little thing makes them unhappy. So
Really?
stop looking at me like
Really?
Apart from that, I would want us to look at the other angle. Using or intentionally stating that, or intentionally saying that your acts are humiliating me, knowing full well that they do not humiliate another person, can also be domestic violence. So it's not just what the person is doing, but because you are seeking to control a person's behavior. So just the fact that one person has decided that I hang out with one particular friend, and you say that I do not want you to hang out with this friend of yours, and you consistently get angry, you consistently try to control that behavior, that is also another aspect of domestic violence. So let's not look at it in terms of only what one person will be doing, but the thing is that violence can be done to each other.
Yeah. I see that you're going into the domain of manipulation
Exactly.
to get a desired conduct from the person.
Manipulation.
It's time for a commercial break. We'll go, and then when we come back, we can look into the aspects of harassment and the other ones, which are behavioral and other conducts like you just started. Don't go away. This is still Law Express.
My mother passed on to me an age-old moisturizing secret handed down from generation to generation. Shea butter has been and still remains the ultimate and trusted natural product for the skin. It is safe for all, including newborns. I use Violon Shea butter products for my hair and skin, and for all my children, right from birth. Violon Shea butter is an amazing diaper cream. I love my family. That is why I trust only Violon Shea butter products for our skincare needs.
Violon Shea Butter. Feed your skin right.
So we spoke of manipulation, where a person would intentionally use certain tools like claiming that they are feeling humiliated, or claiming that they are angry constantly to attempt to regulate or change a person's behavior. That is also emotional abuse, because the other party would necessarily have to change their behavior, conform to you, otherwise you get angry. So the reason why it falls under domestic violence is, where does it end? At what point would you stop?
Until the person stops caring about how you feel when
exactly
he or she doesn't conform.
Yes. And another aspect of emotional and psychological abuse is when the person breaches your right to privacy. So this idea that people tap people's phones, you download other people's WhatsApp messages, read people's emails without their consent. It's all infringing on their right to privacy. They are entitled to have conversations with other persons other than you. So you cannot consistently be demanding and reading messages. It's all part of domestic violence. So basically, this emotional, verbal, and psychological abuse is any act that would not make the person happy, would make the person feel humiliated, inadequate, worthless. All of those things are captured squarely.
Let's come back to these text messages, because that is something that is really rife. Absolutely. So assuming you in a domestic setting, like with your spouse, you exchange passwords. Could it not be implied to mean that you're inviting the person at will to have access to your phone and the contents whenever they please?
Yes, we must look at the issue of it in the sense of consent.
Yeah.
Where you have willingly agreed that the person should have access to your phone and its content, then you cannot complain of domestic violence,
Abuse, yeah.
particularly based on the emotional or psychological abuse, because you have allowed the person into your private space and you do not put any limitation.
And you have power to change your password anyway.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So if you decide that you want to limit the person, then you may want to put passwords on particular apps, maybe on your text messages, on your WhatsApp, and allow the person access to your gallery.
Okay.
You are
So
limiting
where
it.
the person now says that you have locked your WhatsApp and you have locked your text messages, and the person is jittery and trying to make you conform by either manipulating you, by perhaps crying, or forcefully trying to demand that, then it becomes abuse.
It
Yes.
becomes abuse. So the consent should not be coerced.
Okay.
It should be full consent. You have willingly done it, not coercion. Coercion
So
is
what's
not.
this test of this full consent? Is it that when you are reading the messages and the person comes in, you can continue reading the messages, then in the person's presence, then you know that, yes, everybody's comfortable with this?
Yes.
Or you have the password, but you only read when the person is not paying attention because you know that perhaps the person will not be
Well,
happy
then
about
that is
it.
not genuine consent.
That's
I
not
mean, that you're
consent.
actually snooping behind the person to pick information
Exactly.
from his phone. Yeah, that is not.
And that is a breach of the person's
But
privacy.
we must state clearly that there's an exception when it comes to, for the purpose of children who are under the parent's control, particularly children here, I mean children
Minors.
from 0 to 18.
Yeah.
For purposes of training, a parent can have access to a child's
Supervision.
phone and go into the phone and assess what the child is doing for the purpose of training.
Okay.
Unless you're an adult. Obviously, being an adult, you have a mind of your own and you can make decisions for yourself. So your parents or whoever is in charge of your guardian cannot have such intrusion into your private space.
Yeah. I think we could widen the scope of privacy and not restrict it to just gadgets, because people think that that's the only instance. You have like a sister or an aunt, somebody you live in the same space with, and you tend to walk into the person's room without knocking.
Yes.
That could be an invasion of privacy.
It's an invasion
The
of
person has a visitor and requires privacy, and that is the only time you want to be in there,
Yes.
even against the person's
As
will.
Yes.
So they come in all manner of
All
ways.
manner of
Yes.
ways.
And Noella, very important phenomenon that we've seen lately is where persons end the relationship and the star partner who has access during the relationship of pictures and certain pictures that are meant for the person's
Private,
consumption
yeah.
only, now decide to put them in public domain.
More like revenge porn
they
and all of
use-
that.
using
Yes.
that as a means of blackmail or as a means to humiliate the
revenge.
person or as a means to revenge. It is all falls under this abuse,
Yeah.
and it is not right.
Yeah.
You do not have right to put those pictures out there. Even not just pictures, including messages. Because some messages were sent perhaps in a particular context. We have what we call confidentiality. The person who sends the message with the idea that it
It's
remains
just you.
confidential
Remains with
between
you.
the two of you.
Yeah, and
Now
a
because
third
you have
party
fallout,
seeing it.
you decide that, okay, you said this about Akosia when we were going out. I'm going to put it out there for Akosia to know what you were thinking about her or what you were doing when we were going out. All that amounts to domestic violence.
I think we could never exhaust what forms in here. Begging and pleading with your ex-boyfriend, ex-spouse, or ex-whatever to come back to you, even after the person has told you he or she has no interest and has moved on.
Oh, but begging
That
should
is
not be-
harassment. No.
Begging should not necessarily be
So
harassment,
what
unless
is
you
the
feel
extent of the begging? It's not like, so first you send the team, your emissaries, to go and beg. You see your board of directors, which is normally your friends.
Sometimes I call them committee.
The committee
The
of
ladies-
the,
the ladies
of
can
the
call it the committee,
relationship,
yes,
okay?
the committee.
You ask them to intercede.
Yeah.
The lady says, no, I'm no longer interested.
Yeah.
You send the messages, you send the emails, then you start showing up to her office,
That's
start going
stalking.
to her
That
church.
is stalking, yeah.
That's
So
a
we
stalking.
need to talk about this. Then you start liking everything on Facebook, and when people comment under her post, you are in there threatening people, and
Yeah,
you
that
know.
is
So
stalking. I mean,
That is stalking, and that is clearly domestic violence, for which you can get a protective order against
Yeah.
the person.
I think we could never discuss domestic violence without coming straight to what a domestic relationship is. I was wondering whether we had to do that first before discussing the violence bit. But now that we've laid out substantially what constitutes domestic violence, can we now tie it in, because it only becomes violence in a domestic situation where there is a domestic relationship.
Okay.
So what is a domestic relationship?
So the Act defines a domestic relationship as a relationship that is a family relationship or akin to a family
So
relationship.
like a family
Like a family relationship. So if you are persons that are living together in a single family home, you've always lived together and you do things together, same way you cook, etc. Those relationships even fall under domestic violence.
Okay.
So let's not look at only family relationships. Even for persons who are divorced, they still remain in a domestic relationship because they used to be a family. Engaged persons, those people also form part of a family relationship. So any relationship that is akin to a family, not necessarily intimate, not necessarily intimate. So as Apanga said here earlier, you have an ebusuapingin or an aunt who you live with, your people who you take care of. You are a guardian of a child, or you are a customary successor. All of those relationships are domestic relationships.
Yes, and to add to that, it could even be previous domestic relationship, as you mentioned, when you are divorced.
Yeah.
So it could happen that you are no more in the relationship, but you've had a previous relationship. And by that conduct, you have come under the setting of a domestic
Situation.
And it has not only limited to homes or family, even to the extent of workplace and schools.
Yeah.
So that where a child is under the care of a caregiver or a school, the relationship alone places it under the domain of a
I think we
domestic.
shouldn't also omit the category of people who probably are just expecting a child together,
Yes.
fostering a child
Yes.
together,
Yes, yes.
or have a child together without necessarily being intimate or like being
The
living
biological,
together.
yes.
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 And also people who live in the same environment, like co-tenants.
Yes.
So they all would come in.
Yes.
Into
Come
the
under
the
domestic
scope.
domestic relationship. Yes.
Yeah. So the test is not just intimacy alone. It's also about a blood relationship,
Where there's a familial
consanguinity.
relationship, and
Yes.
where it is like a family situation, living together, doing things together. Yes, that forms part of.
Or where you even contemplate having a family relationship in
Yes.
the future, so that you are courting
Yeah.
as boyfriend, girlfriend, even though you've not had any sexual relationship yet, but you anticipate that in the future you are going to have family together. Or where you are even expecting a child, but you are not even the biological parent of the child, where you are foster parent of a child.
You've adopted
Of
a
adopted
child.
child.
Yeah.
Yes.
And where the relationship is in the nature that, but for some circumstances, you probably would have been married.
Absolutely, yes.
So maybe something forbids you from marrying.
Yes.
Maybe you are the side chick, but then you live together.
Yeah.
Okay, that is still a domestic relationship.
Yes,
There is
yes.
a reason why there's a bar to the relationship, to the marriage.
Yes.
Perhaps there's already a marriage subsisting under the law. So that is what stops the man or the woman from contracting a new marriage with you just yet. But then you live together in a way that suggests that there is a domestic relationship happening. That will fall within the scope. I know it's not a popular opinion, but
Yeah.
I mean, it's something that is
No, it is,
existent,
it is,
and we need to
yes.
talk about it.
It is.
We sampled people's opinion on this topic today, and we want to take a listen and see if they understand where we are headed, and probably we can give our feedback.
Domestic violence is any act committed by a close relative which can cause physical psychological, emotional pain to an individual. And I think perpetrators of such acts should be dealt with severely by the law.
On the issue of domestic violence, I think it's just violence against anybody in the house. So a wife beating the husband or a husband touching the wife can be considered domestic violence.
What I know about domestic violence is that it's an abuse in the home which causes pain and inflicts pain to the victim. It causes them trauma emotionally, physically, and psychologically.
What I know about domestic violence is an aggressive behavior towards someone. And the ones I know of is the ones that occur within married couples.
So imagine coming back from work or coming back from wherever you find yourself, and the partner that you find yourself with welcomes you violently. It can be in the form of fights, verbal assault, or whatever it is. And it leads to a whole lot of things. It can lead to emotional stress.
So we have organizations or institutions in Ghana that cater for those people, like those who Triage, to come in aid for people like that and then help them in terms of that, because they are there for us. And since the government is supporting them in a way, I suggest that they should be helped, because a lot of abuses have been going on and people are ignoring it. So something should be done about it.
Well, quite an interesting perspective from some of the viewers. I think people have a very fair idea of what domestic violence constitutes, and I am glad that we hold such views generally, because then when we have an enlightened society, people can enforce or ensure that their rights are not abused. And so it's good that we do this, but we should continue with the education more so people understand that it goes beyond just what we know as physical abuse and extend all the way to economic, psychological, harassment, and several other forms of abuses, so that we can go ahead and then ensure that people do not get abused all the time.
Apart from that, looking at the domestic situation, you know, we give a lot of examples. Some include even your house help. Once you are in a domestic relationship with them, once you live with them, they live under your roof, they form part of your household. And so you can even abuse those persons.
Beyond the domestic relationships we've stated, the courts could determine whether there is a domestic relationship at play. So yes, we've mentioned all this, but then there could be more.
Yeah, there could be more, and the list is not exhaustive. And even situations where you're not too sure that it's within a domestic setting, the court could give a definition or a pronouncement on it, whether or not that is a domestic setting. And my sister here mentioned issues regarding house helps. What is being more worrying is not physical abuse of house helps, any form of abuse of house helps, including depriving them of food, or particular food, or where they sleep, the number of hours they work. That is very important, because we think that once they live with us,
treating them
they can work
degrading
and then worst of it is that you refuse to pay them and pile up the pay and say, when you are going, I'll give it to you. And one
and
other
it was
example,
not pre-agreed
at all,
you know.
at all.
That's financial.
And even now, thank God that there's some indication that you're supposed to register your domestic workers. Now, even worse is when they break plates and they misplace items at home, you surcharge them and take it out of their salaries or their pay. I mean, we all appreciate that in domestic environment, there are some accidents and some situations that may arise as a result of the person's conduct. But you find situations where persons in charge tends to impose sanctions unilaterally on house helps, drivers. And it extends to not just house helps, drivers, gardeners, security men, or any person within the domestic setting who may not be a family member but has become part of the household as either a staff or someone who offers services to the house.
To add to that, in determining whether there is a domestic relationship, the court will usually look at the amount of time spent with these persons, how long the relationship has been running, the place and time you ordinarily meet, and the manner in which you engage.
Yes.
All of that would help the
All
court
of that
to
will
arrive
help,
at
yes.
whether this is a domestic relationship or not. We'll go for another quick commercial break. When we return, we're going to consider some social media questions, attempt to answer them, and then we address the issue of what a person is supposed to do should you find yourself in a situation that you think or you have been told is a domestic violence situation. This is Law Express.
My name is Yaokumi from Koforidua. My daughter has been married to her husband over the last 6 years. I visited them recently and I noticed my daughter has bruises all over her face and part of her body. I tried to inquire from her and she won't talk. I spoke to some of their neighbors and it turned out her husband abuses her physically and verbally, the reason for those bruises. I confronted my daughter and she says she enjoys it when her husband beats her up. For her, it's a sign her husband loves her so much. I seriously can't think far. What can I do in this situation as a father to help my daughter? It's killing me inside.
Well, quite an interesting question and situation, but very unfortunate too. It is not strange. I have heard a few times that some people hold a view within Ghanaian parlance that it's a sign of love when a partner or a spouse physically abuses the other part, a spouse. It's very, very unfortunate. I mean, I do not understand how an abuse can be a sign of love. It's just a reflection of how sometimes we have limited or use abuse or violence on people to express our love towards them. It is wrong because you do not know the extent or the result of that violence, where it could land. I mean, he may hit you once here and hit you harder the next time. And that could, and we've had several situations of people dying, people having permanent deformities, and people living with scars, mental scars that they've never been able to recover from. So it is wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, this brings us into the issue of who can report a domestic violence.
Mm-hmm.
The victim can make a report, as the law says, or any other person can make a report on behalf of the victim. The report can be made to any police station near where the incident occurred,
yeah,
or where the victim lives, mm-hmm, or even where the complainant lives. So we have options. So it may happen that you live in Spintex, but you were abused in Jowolo. You could lodge a complaint at Jowolo, or you could lodge a complaint at Spintex, at the nearest police station. And we have persons who may not be able to lodge a complaint either because they lack the capacity to do so. They are infants, and so the law says that a parent or a guardian who has a control over the child can lodge a complaint on behalf of the child. Likewise, in this situation, she's talking about an adult person who is already married. Mm-hmm. The father could lodge a complaint. Who is liking
it. Yes. That's a shocking part, you know.
And that brings us to another important part, that you can't consent to domestic violence. Consent, she can't say that I like it, so I'm enjoying it, because that is consent, but you can't consent to domestic violence. Mm-hmm. So the mere fact that she says she likes it is not enough. So the father can go ahead and lodge a complaint. But the challenge is whether she would come out and give the evidence and come out and speak, whether she can really be bold enough to speak against her husband.
So that is where the law would allow a social worker to investigate the domestic relationship. Yes. So it doesn't matter if the person refuses to cooperate with the police. What may happen is that, considering the circumstances, if we've seen that this person has been so abused that the person is actually just a shadow of herself, and would not want to report to the police station, what will happen is that there may be a social worker assigned to investigate their living circumstances and produce a report based on even their neighbors, things that their neighbors have seen, things that their neighbors have heard, look at the living situation, where each party sleeps, what they eat, etc., and then make that report. So
I think the sad thing about toxic relationships and people's inability to report the abuse or violence they face is the highs they get from the makeup after the lows of the abuse that happened prior. In this particular situation, I believe that the father, clearly this lady has injuries all over her. There are scars which have to be explained. So the good thing is that the courts, apart from the social inquiry report, would also assign or may assign a clinical psychologist to check her state of mind. This might expose the fact that she's been in a pattern which she's caught up in and she thinks is normal, and that might be able to help. So yes, he could report anybody in the neighborhood, apart from even the father, who knows or has facts about this ongoing abuse, could report to the police. And then once the prosecution starts, the judge may order based on, I mean, you come to court, you are injured from head to toe, and you are insisting that you like it. Naturally, there would be an inquiry by a psychologist to check your actual state of mind.
Yes.
So I think that some intervention can be put in place for this person.
My mother passed on to me an age-old moisturizing secret handed down from generation to generation. Shea butter has been and still remains the ultimate and trusted natural product for the skin. It is safe for all, including newborns. I use Violon Shea butter products for my hair and skin, and for all my children right from birth. Violon Shea butter is an amazing diaper cream. I love my family. That is why I trust only Violon Shea butter products for our skincare needs.
Violon Shea Butter. Feed your skin right.
The penalties for domestic violence are clearly stated in the Act. You may go to prison depending on what incidents of domestic violence have been made against you, what reports have been made against you. The courts could also impose a fine on you. There are protection orders that the court also makes against you, which could last a number of years, specifically probably asking that you do not contact a certain person or come within a certain distance of that person. So these are all ways in which the court punishes persons for domestic violence. You may also be asked to make restitution. So if you've damaged a person's property, you may be compelled by the courts to restore the person back to the situation that the person would have been in if but for your violence. Yes.
Let me just touch on a bit of specifics. In the sense of a fine, the court could fine you not exceeding 500 penalty unit, and a penalty unit is 12 Ghana cedis. So we are talking close to about 6,000 Ghana cedis for a single offense. And so if you have multiple offenses, the court could impose sanctions on each of them not exceeding 6,000 Ghana cedis, or go to prison for not more than 2 years term.
More than 3 years.
Not more than 3 years term, or both. Yeah. So you could be fined and still go to prison, or you could be fined alone or go to prison alone, depending on the nature of the offense.
You may also be asked to pay compensation to the victim.
Exactly.
And we didn't indicate the fact that you may be entitled to free medical care where you report to the police.
Yes.
So after the report is made, you are physically injured, the police may give you a medical form, and the state takes care of those kind of bills because it's the state's own way of supporting people in this kind of situation, which perhaps you didn't choose. So it's important to put it out here.
Public hospital.
Yeah.
The 37 Kolebu police hospital. Once you go to a government hospital, you would be taken care of, and your medical form would be filled by a doctor. Apart from that, the court is obliged to promote reconciliation. Whilst we've already said that you should remove yourself from a domestic relationship that is violent or abuses you, there are certain instances where persons who were engaged in domestic violence have changed their ways, and after going through rehabilitation with a psychologist, etc., and the court looks at those situations and encourages people not to let go of those familial relationships just because of one act of violence. So this is also contained in the Domestic Violence Act.
Yes.
Finally, where a person dies from domestic violence,
Yes.
okay, a family member,
Yes.
any other competent person, be it a neighbor,
Yes.
the person's competent successor or representative may
Yes.
make a report to the police about this action. It's important to indicate that, sadly, some people do not survive to tell their stories.
Yes.
And yes, perpetrators would not go free regardless. They still will be punished, and anybody within that space who is aware of what has happened ought to make that report, because obviously the person is dead and dead men don't speak.
Yes.
This has been a great conversation. Viewers, we urge you to keep the conversation going. There's no way we could have exhausted every angle of this discussion. We just wanted to push you to talk about it everywhere, let people know that they have rights, they are protected in the domestic space, and that the privilege of being related to somebody in one way or the other does not give you the right to abuse them. This has been our show. My name is Noella Seju. Thank you for staying with us. I was joined by Lamtig Apanga and Iris K. Agriolines, both private legal practitioners. So same time next week. It's been great having you. Goodbye.